next up, this is another thrill. The Elements of Marie Curie by Dava Sobel. And Dava, as I'm sure most of the people on this Zoom know, is the author of the international bestseller Longitude, the best-selling Pulitzer Prize finalist Galileo's Daughter, and many other wonderful books. She's won so many awards and is also the recipient of a Guggenheim. She's currently editor of a poetry column in Scientific American called Meter. George Gibson, her editor, is executive editor at Grove Atlantic. Previously, he was president and publisher of Walker and Company, where he published Dava Sobel's books Longitude and Galileo's Daughter. As Dava writes in the book, and this book, it's, what's pretty amazing is, I guess we thought we knew everything there was to know about Marie Curie, but turns out, no. Even now, she says, nearly a century after her death, Marie Curie remains the only female scientist most people can name. That just totally resonated with me. And some will object, because they're paying closer attention, but I think in terms of like the household name, that's probably true. And while much has been written about Marie Curie, Sobel brings a fresh eye to her subject. Among other things, she introduces us to 45 or so aspiring female scientists who spent a formative period in the Curie lab, being mentored by Marie Curie herself. So without further ado, Dava and George, please come onto the stage.
Hi.
And congratulations. I was riveted by this book. I feel like, part of my heritage is Polish, and so I'm of the generation where Marie Curie was, kind of introduced. But so many revelations, so riveting. Congratulations. And
thank you.
Going to tell us.
Thanks.
Hey, thanks, Leigh, and thanks for doing such a wonderful job of moderating this. It's such a pleasure to be amongst booksellers and librarians and other champions of this book industry we love, and so many other wonderful authors and editors too. And for me, it's a special thrill and a privilege to be in conversation again with you, Dava, about this wonderful new book, The Elements of Marie Curie, which Grove Atlantic will publish on October 8th. It is remarkable to say still that 90 years, almost to the day that she died, Marie Curie does remain the most famous woman in the history of science. That maybe shouldn't be the case, but it is. And yet she was so much more than a scientist in a laboratory. And the way you've chosen to tell this story through the lens of the women the young women that she inspired to come into science through her work, through working with her in the laboratory, makes this story come alive, makes her life come alive in a way that is totally vivid and I think is a unique way of presenting her life. This reconnects us 30 years after we first met in March of 1994, when I read the new issue of Harvard Magazine and found myself fascinated by an article that you had written about the Longitude Symposium that had taken place at Harvard recently. I thought that perhaps a short book about the invention of the chronometer could be interesting. So the magazine connected us. You ended up writing the wonderful book Longitude, which became a huge bestseller here and abroad, which something we might never have imagined in our first.
Never get over it.
But what do you remember about the beginning of what has become a wonderful friendship?
I remember that phone call and the way you talked about your idea. You were interested in a science book that would appeal to adults who would not identify themselves as being interested in science. And those are my people. And then you also said you saw the idea as the biography of a scientific instrument. And that was also very interesting. And I thought, this editor knows exactly what he wants. I'm not going to have the experience of writing something and then the editor telling me, no, that's not what I wanted. So, and then I met you and you were a really nice person on top of having these good ideas. So we were a team.
Well, then you wrote a book that exceeded any possible expectation I could have had about it. And we had a wonderful time publishing Live Student Galileu's Daughter. We stayed in touch over the years. And then maybe in 2019, something like that, we had one of our teas. And I remember suggesting to you that maybe you consider writing a short biography of Marie Curie, not necessarily for Grove Atlantic, but just as an idea. And you demurred. Why?
In 2019, of course, I knew who she was, but I had read a good biography of her. I had been a judge for the Los Angeles Times Book Prizes and for the science and technology category. And so I had read a biography of her that I thought was very good. And although it was maybe a couple of decades old by that point, I didn't have anything new to say about her. And I didn't want to take her on just because she's an iconic figure in science. I wanted to have something new and important to say about her.
Yeah. So I thought maybe that door was closed about Curie, and
I thought so too.
I went off, off on other things that I was doing, and then about a year later, you called to say you were rethinking the idea. And
yes,
what happened?
Early in 2020, I was invited to review a book. I think I'm hearing a little echo of myself. Is anybody else? Are we okay?
Seems okay.
Maybe it's just me. I was invited to review a book called Women in Their Element, and to write a review for a magazine called Distillations, which is published by the History of Science Institute. And this book was a collection of about 35 profiles of women chemists. And I had not heard of probably 33 of them. So it was a revelation. And a bigger revelation was how many of the women collected in this book had spent some time in Madame Curie's lab. This one came from Norway, and that one came from Canada to work with her, and another one came from Austria. And I started to wonder what was going on here. How come I hadn't known how many women there were? And just a little bit of poking turned up the number of about 45. So not just the ones who were included in that book, Women in Their Element, but many others who hadn't made it in there. And I was very excited because I was fresh off the experience of writing The Glass Universe, which was all about a group of women astronomers at Harvard. And here was a similar situation, but in French and about radioactivity. But it was the experience of writing The Glass Universe had sensitized me to the problems faced by women in science, which I'm embarrassed to say I had not realized before, nor had I realized until I wrote that book that as a child of the 50s, I had absorbed a lot of negative attitudes about women that I was embarrassed to see in myself. So with the Harvard astronomers, I kept being surprised by what they had done because my expectations for women scientists were low. So the book cured me of that, writing The Glass Universe, and here was a chance to tell another kind of story. And my mother was a chemist, so I had a sense that I could learn enough about radioactivity to explain it to other people and tell the story that now I really wanted to tell.
And you also had gone to Bronx High School of Science, so you had a science background yourself, and in fact,
that's true. But a science background is really not enough for any project I've ever taken on. There's a lot of study that goes into it, which is part of the fun of it.
But you
the learning.
you had spent many years with your previous books in the world of astronomy,
Yes.
and understanding that. But maybe describe now the experience you had delving into the subatomic world, so the opposite of the heavens, delving deep into the subatomic world of chemistry and physics.
Yeah. Yeah. There were many days when I wondered whatever made me think I could do this. But it's equally fascinating. What has always interested me is the human endeavor of doing science. And that turns out to be very similar, no matter what discipline you look at, because I think people have an impression of scientists as being unemotional, dispassionate, interested in establishing facts. And real scientists aren't like that at all. They are extremely passionate and often heedless of danger, and about as emotionally engaged with their work as it's possible to be. So I feel I spend a lot of time defending scientists against charges of being weirdos. But and women scientists get an especially bad reputation, because there's a sense that whatever they're doing, it's boring and repetitive. Whereas when men do science, it's inspiration and an aha moment round the clock. So to have this story, this group of women, Marie Curie is the icon of women scientists, for good and bad, because she sets a very high bar for other women. As inspirational as she is to women who want to go into the sciences, she can give you the impression that unless you're ready to make a couple of discoveries, each deserving of a Nobel Prize, need not apply.
But she was also, she was an extraordinarily human being. I mean,
well, yes,
in so many different ways, and that's what comes across in this book. I mean, yes, she is the only person in history, male or female, to win 2 Nobel Prizes in 2 different scientific disciplines, but she was this extraordinary mother, extraordinary friend to Einstein and others. She was, during World War I, she was, on the front lines of helping soldiers recover from wounds. I mean, amazing woman.
Yeah, taking a mobile X-ray unit to the front lines. And her relationship with her own 2 daughters was one of my favorite parts of the story, because the girls were very different. One became a scientist, followed her mother into the lab, and eventually took it over. It also won a Nobel Prize. And the other one was artistic, but she loved them equally and stayed close to both of them her entire life.
Yeah. Well, it's an amazing book. It really is. I've edited it before, Dava, but this is a tour de force as far as I'm concerned. Not only for the storytelling of it, but for your ability to make this very complex subatomic world come alive. And I think that's a triumph, that you were able to do that. And everyone who has read the book so far feels that way. They do feel like they've been taken inside that world and they understand it as well as one can possibly understand it who isn't a scientist or physicist or chemist yourself. But it's a remarkable achievement. It really is.
Yeah. Thank you. Marie Curie was also like a very passionate woman, had romances and loved her husband and
love affair.
Love affair. So there's a lot of dimension to this, and the writing is extraordinary, of course, Dava, because it's you. And it's so interesting that your mother was a chemist, and George, you're not a scientist, but did you feel like you needed to like bone up on science in order to edit this book?
No, I felt like I just needed to keep asking Dava, can you make this a little clearer? Can you make this a little clearer?
Exactly what an editor does, right?
Torturing Dava with these requests.
I would like to say that the experience of being edited by George is to get a manuscript back with at least one question on every page.
God help you.
It's great. He's totally engaged. Yeah.
Well, thank you both. This was great. And
Thank you for moderating so well.
You.
Congratulations. Appreciate it. Thank you.